guys, we are ready to get started. How many of you have seen Finding Bigfoot? I should probably ask how many of you haven't seen it. It seems like mostly everyone has. 9 seasons, 100 episodes. These guys have done so much to help spread awareness of the subject of Bigfoot and unknown mystery creatures here in the United States and beyond, that I think it's important to recognize that not only are we here in the Bigfoot Capital of Texas, but to have these guys here with us is an incredible honor. They have a really awesome new podcast called Bigfoot and Beyond, and there's also the new North American Bigfoot Center in Portland, Oregon. These guys have done some amazing work. It's my pleasure to introduce to you Cliff Barackman and James Bobo Fay. Come on, guys.
Thank you, Daniel. And thank you for everyone having us down here. This is my first Texas Bigfoot Conference. I was at the Southeast Texas Bigfoot Conference a couple years ago. That was great. That was an awesome one. So definitely had to get this one in before I kick the bucket. This is the weekend to do it. So I can die a happy man now.
I'm going to let Bobo have the microphone. I don't need it. I was an elementary school teacher. You were all 10 years old to me. Although I do really appreciate them leaving this chair on the stage so I can Bobo for a change. But this is my second time at this conference, and I love this conference. Not only because I love Craig, and honestly, don't tell anyone, I love Texas in general. Not only because the barbecue, not only because you're the only crowd that has ever applauded when I said guns. But also, thirdly, most importantly, for that right there, you are so welcoming and so kind. So thank you very much for having us back, or me back, and Bobo. I'm glad that you finally allowed him to come.
Took a little work. Governors had to sign some paperwork.
How does that feel, Bob's looking up to me in a different sort of way, huh?
I'm used to looking up to Cliff.
See, I tried to convince him I'm actually not that short, I'm just really far away. Well, tomorrow we're both doing presentations individually, or at least theoretically we are. I'm not quite sure what's going on, because we do so many of these gigs, they just kind of say, hey, go do, and they usher us around, and we do, clap, monkey clap. That's kind of what the gig is about. But I think we're both doing individual ones tomorrow. This is our chance to be on stage together. If you listen to our podcast, you can hear us banter back and forth all the time. It's kind of fun because our podcast is really about, hanging out with Cliff and the Bobs at the end of the day, right? But one of the things we like to do is because even though tomorrow we're doing presentations, so we're telling you things about whatever, this is your chance to lead our discussion. So what we like to do in situations like this is to open up the stage basically to you, and you can ask a question and let us loose on it. But we'll tell you what we really think. So be careful what you ask, because a lot of people don't like what we really think. Because remember, on Finding Bigfoot, we had editors, so they can take that stuff out.
Thank God.
Yeah. Well, we don't have editors here, man. This is Texas, You deserve the truth, whether you like it or not. Can you handle it is the question. So think about something you might want to know. You can ask us anything you want, and I already know some of the questions that are going to be asked. Does Renee really not believe? Or all that sort of stuff. We already know because we do these things a lot. So why don't you think about something you want to know, hand it over, raise your hand, Bobo will call on you, and we'll just riff on it and see what happens.
Wow. Yes, ma'am.
I want to know what was it Momo, the movie that you guys were playing in? It was the deputy or the sheriff or whatever. I saw y'all in the trailer. What was that like?
Oh yeah, she asked us about being in the Momo movie, the Missouri Monster that Lyle Blackburn was a big part of. He was the narrator of it. Cliff and I had a little scene, a couple scenes in that. Cliff was the sheriff, I was the deputy. Yeah, Seth Breedlove, you guys know Seth Breedlove, Small Town Monsters? He's my favorite filmmaker. And Lyle's a big part of that program too. But yeah, we had a great time, except for it was like May in Ohio. It dropped down what was it, it was 38 degrees or something. Yeah, it was.
Well, we filmed it in Ohio. Seth reached out to me at least. I don't know how he reached out to you, but he reached out to me and said, we really would like you to do a cameo in this movie we're making because it seems like it'd be a lot of fun. We'll write out, it won't be a big role, nothing to stress out about, and maybe you and Bobo can do it at some point. When do you think that might work? And I go, well, God, we're both doing the Ohio conference, and you're living in Ohio. Why don't we try to schedule it around that? So we did the Ohio conference from Thursday to Sunday or whenever that was. Monday, I don't know. And then Sunday night or Monday night, we drove 2 hours and met Seth out on set. And, we did the gig basically. But man, it was cold.
Yeah, I got to have a jacket. Cliff did.
Yeah, I didn't get a jacket, but I got a cold afterwards that kept me down in bed for a week, so that was cool.
I was trying to give Cliff acting pointers because I thought I was killing it. I thought Cliff was sucking. And then I saw the movie, I was like, oh, Jesus. I was the one who was sucking, but I was pretty delusional. I thought I was getting awards and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, it turns out that the world is a mirror.
Yes, sir. The glasses. Yep, you.
I've actually asked Cliff this and a couple other people, and I think you're the right guy to ask this question. Funniest encounter that you either had or heard?
Like funniest.
Come on now.
Funniest. I've never been asked that before. Funniest encounter. Well, no one saw it. Probably, I had an encounter actually in Caddo Lake on the Louisiana side back in June. And it was a family group it got flooded obviously this last spring. And it was all backed up around there. And the Sasquatches got pushed up out of the bayou, up onto some higher dry land. And I was with my buddy here, Danny. If you guys saw the Caddo Lake episode, he was the DuPont family. We were with the DuPont family, and Danny took us out in his houseboat, pontoon boat around that night. Well, he called me up, and they were having all kinds of action down there, so I went back down there and visited. And I was laying there. We set up this tent, we cut holes in it and stuff so we could stick the therm out and film out of it and all that. And they left me there alone. I sat there, and they weren't gone. They were just walking out. Him and his wife. They were gone maybe 3 or 4 minutes, and I started hearing stuff coming in. And I got some knocks, and I was laying there, and they were seeing a little toddler, looked like a chimp, and then one little smaller than me, like a juvenile, and they were going up and messing around. The people have a trailer there, and the big one was going up and looking through the window, and it actually. They put a blanket up covering the window so I couldn't see the TV anymore, and it smashed the air conditioner and landed in the middle of the living room when they were watching TV. So this place was going off pretty hard, and Danny got a bunch of audio there, and so I was laying there in the tent, and I could hear him moving around and mumbling, a little kind of mumbly kind of sound, like not really mumbling. I could just hear him like breathing, and they walked around the tent a couple times, and I went to get up, and I was laying on a vinyl sleep pad thing, like plastic vinyl, and I was wearing some jeans, these kind of pants, these Cools, and they made like a swishing sound, and all of a sudden I heard 2 big steps on the other from the opposite side, and I just saw the whole corner of the tent push down this giant hand, and I froze in this weird position, and I didn't move for an hour. And I was thinking, like, if someone could see this right now, if it got taped, it just gave me this vibe, like, don't move. And I said, yes, sir, and just froze in this strange position. I could never hold a pose like that for 5 minutes in normal life, but I just froze for an hour.
If you had that encounter again, I bet you could.
I think I would man up on the next time, but it's easier said than done when you're sitting there unarmed by yourself in the dark, and you just hear this huge 2 big steps, and I've heard about the tents getting pushed in before, and I've never seen that or had it happen to me, and so that was the first time. Just Cliff, have a funny encounter you want to recite?
None that wouldn't embarrass you.
Dude, I got embarrassed on TV every week, go ahead.
I thought of one. We were in Ohio, Mohegan State Park. We had the Little League team episode where we brought them out, Matt and I brought Hill. Great activity all night long. At the end of the night, keeping a very long story short, Bobo saw one of these things, but he didn't realize what it was at the time. He thought it was me or Adam or one of the tech guy because it was kind of shorter, stockier.
Our whole tech crew was Cliff size, like, short.
mental giants and shorter men. But basically, I was out doing an interview 300 or 400 yards that way, because we go out and we film the deal, and then afterwards we split in teams, 2 cameras, and then and we do the interview. So like when they cut the clip, looking at the camera is saying something witty and intelligent, that was always filmed afterwards. Right? And so when I was out doing that stuff, we were getting rocks thrown, and we heard knocks, and so after I was done, I went and found Bobo, who was sitting in the car. I go,
No, I came walking back. I just walked
no,
up.
you were in the car when I found you. You were in the car. We're like Fred and Everett.
Well, we had just come from Pennsylvania doing a ghost episode, whatever, paranormal. So we had just spent a week out there listening to all these Bigfoot and ghost stories.
Yeah, these guys had like pictures of like these shadow men in their basement or some weirdness like that. And I was like, I don't know, I'm a Bigfoot guy, I don't know. But but when I found Bobo, I go, dude, they're here. He goes, oh, Cliff, I think I saw a shadow man. What? Dude, it's a shadow man. I go, you're big, you saw he's walking. I go, no, dude, Bigfoots are here right now. I said, I saw a shadow. No, you probably saw a Bigfoot. Tell me what you saw. And then we talked it through, and then we pieced some timeline stuff together from other crew members and stuff. Yeah, and sure enough, he saw a Sasquatch from 20, 30 feet away. But it was so dark, all he saw was the outline. But it's like, we're out looking for him, and we find a shadow man? So that's something.
Well, but this is interesting about the behavior of the Squatch, because it walked up. It was one of the producers went to go smoke by the edge of the river, and we were in this big parking lot area for a daytime use and picnic area. And so I'm walking back, and I could see the silhouette. There was lights on in camp, like computer screens with the producers, and a couple little, literally low light lanterns. And I see this come walking up from the river area. I didn't know this at the time, but one of our female producers had been down there smoking a cigarette, and she thought I was trying to scare her, walking back and forth, walking in the water, kicking rocks back and forth, and grumbling, growling sounds. Then it walked up behind her, and she thought it was me, and she turned around to say something. And this thing, cliff-sized, hair-covered, dark, growled at her, and she ran and locked herself in the car. Then our Flippy, I don't know if any of you guys know Flippy, he was awesome. He was our camping guy, cameraman. A huge rock came flying through the trees, like way too big for a human to throw, came landed right in front of him. So he took off. And then at this point, it walked up, and it walked within 70 feet of that camp, totally unobstructed, because I was watching it. And less than from here to the back of the room, it walked way closer than that to all the people. They didn't notice it because it was so dark. I only noticed it because it was backlit. And as I was walking down back to camp, it started beelining right at me from pretty far away, like 100 yards away. I could see it just coming right towards me. So I adjusted my course. You could drive 3 motorhomes down this drive into the camp day area. It's a really wide. And we've walked into each other at night out there, and just walking normal speed, and you collide with someone and bang your head or something, it hurts. You don't want to do it. So, obviously. So I'm looking at this thing, and so I adjust my course. It adjusts its course back to me, and I'm thinking, who is that? Because I knew where everyone was, and I was thinking, maybe it's one of the dads from the Little Leaguers, but they left 6 hours earlier, and it's 4 in the morning. It's 80, I think it was 82 degrees at 4 a.m. And what's this dude wearing a jacket with a hood on it for, a puffy jacket? And it walked up, and I turned away again so I could see it crossed in front of the last light, and then it was still heading towards me. So I walked, and I got about from here to the end of that table or to the speaker a little bit further than that. And I go, who is that? Who is that? And it just stood there, and it started backing up, and I was pulling out my headlamp. By the time I got my headlamp out, it was gone. This whole side for a quarter mile was just thick, impenetrable bramble, thorn bushes. Then there was all the vehicles parked with all the crew. Then here was the picnic area, some big old girls. I guess they're some of the biggest trees in Ohio that are still left. And it must have just ran and went up the tree, because there was a little movement in the tree, but I didn't really see anything. And I was looking around, and it was just gone. It was gone so fast, I thought, it had to be a ghost.
Shadow Man.
Yeah, Shadow Man.
Let's go to the next question. Anyone?
Yes, sir. Harry.
Gentlemen, we've all heard you do your hours of calls on TV. Would you blend us by doing one of your time?
I'll do one. My throat's so thrashed. I'll do one tomorrow at the end of my talk. I don't want to blow my voice out before the talk. Well, you guys are all coming tomorrow, right? Yeah, okay.
Good. Anything else you guys would like to know?
Yes, ma'am.
I have a question and comment to your funny story to the gentleman back here. On your second encounter with the tent, if it comes down at you like that and you go to run off, you really think you might get away from him?
I didn't say I'd run off. I tried to film it. Yeah, because I don't think they're going to hurt you like that. They just make you think they're going to.
His reach would be very big, though.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the hand looked giant. And it pushed the tent. I tried to do it the next day. Like, I couldn't, I mean, all the poles came together and stuff. I couldn't push it any more than like 4 or 5 inches. That thing, like, I can't believe it didn't break the poles because it came down. It was that size. Yes, sir.
How do you think one of y'all get involved searching for Bigfoot?
I always say my good looks and high IQ is how I got involved in searching for Bigfoot, but just, I think probably like a lot of people, I saw that PG film when I was about 5 years old, read whatever books I could find, watched whatever TV show came on, which was really far and few between. And when I got older, we were in high school, my buddies and I went on an expedition looking for Bluff Creek, and just been doing it ever since.
Yeah, I've always been weird. So I grew up in the 1970s. Like, I'm almost 49 years old, so I was subjected to In Search of and Legend of Boggy Creek and all the cool schlocky stuff in the 70s that was out, and I just loved it. But I also love monsters in general, Godzilla, whatever. Like a monster guy. I don't want a suspense horror movie. I want monsters. I'm not watching it. Which is a contention between my wife and I might have. I like weird, eccentric things, always have. So I've always kept my eye on the subject along with all the other weird stuff in the world, right? But when I was in college, I had a few-hour break between the classes on the opposite side of campus. And I went to Cal State Long Beach, and I have a degree in music. And the music department was way over there, like literally a mile away. And from where I had these classes in the middle of the day. Not enough time to go back and practice, not enough time to really do anything. So I would go into the library and pick books off of the shelves in subjects that I was interested in, which happened to be sciences. I'm a science kind of a nerd, one day I chose a book off the shelf called Man-Like Monsters on Trial. It was a collection of scholarly articles that were presented in the 1970 conference on Sasquatches in British Columbia, the first one of its kind, on which this conference stands on its shoulders. But this is a true scientific conference where you had to, well, not that this one is, don't get me wrong, but this one you had to submit papers to be published in a journal afterwards. And so when I was thumbing through this thing, I started reading some of these journal articles, and my head started spinning. My mind was blown. Like, how could it be true that literally every native tribe in North America that lives in suitable habitat has a name for an animal that fits this description? How could that be true if there isn't a biological reality behind it? Then I started exploring Dr. Krantz, his work. This was in 1993, 1994, in that era. And Krantz's book came out in 91, the first edition of it. They republished it a few years later. But Big Footprints, the first edition of the book, I started reading his work, and okay, so there's the inferred morphology, the anatomy, the bone structure of the foot happens coincidentally to be redesigned, shall we say, to accommodate a mass of that size walking bipedally. That doesn't make sense unless there's something biological behind it. And that's when I started realizing that science has been done on this subject, but it's not getting the radio play that it should, right? And at the time, I finally settled on music as a major, by the way, because Calculus 2 kicked my ass. And I was actually initially a physics and astronomy major. But I realized I want to do calculus for a living. My God. And so I decided to do something else, right? I've always been an amateur astronomer. I've always been interested in science in general. I'm an amateur scientist. I'm a citizen scientist. And I know that amateur astronomers make significant contributions to the field every single year. They're the ones that discover the vast majority of brand new comets. They're the ones that discover the vast majority of new asteroids in the sky. Because professionals have to write grants and they petition, they wait 3 years to go on a telescope for a night, all that stuff. It's the amateurs that do the work. And I realized that, oh my God, this is a subject like that. Since the academics are not fulfilling their role, they're not taking up the baton, they're not fulfilling their responsibilities, it's up to us as amateurs to do the job for them until they're ready to carry that for us. And so I decided, well, I'm already backpacking and stuff. I'm already, camping all the time. And at the end of the day, Bigfooting is essentially camping with a purpose. So I started camping specifically in places where Bigfoots have been seen. In '94, I went to Bluff Creek for the first time, trying to naively find the Patterson-Gimlin film site. It took me 3 or 4 years to actually find it. But that first year, I went to the confluence of Bigfoot Creek, where it flows into Bluff Creek. Yeah, there's a Bigfoot Creek at Bluff Creek. I didn't find out for another decade that they named that tributary that because the local Yurok say that's where the Sasquatches go to fish salmon every year. I didn't know that at the time, but I found prints that year. Beginner's luck. So I was hooked, done. Just set the hook and throw me away. Because I throw away the rest of my life. I'm still here drowning in the subject matter because of that. That's how I got into it.
I guess close to a citizen scientist, I'm a pseudoscientist.
Yeah. If I ask one more question?
Yeah.
Have y'all, either one of y'all, we're originally from East Texas. We moved to Omaha, Nebraska for my wife's job last year. Have y'all done any kind of Bigfoot searching or hunting, whatever, in Nebraska?
I haven't.
Did the conference there in Hastings. And from what I understand, there's a couple of areas that I've heard that Nebraska holds Sasquatches. There's some reservation in the southern central part, but Meldrum and the other guy who funded a trip I was on one time went down there. They were unimpressed. I think looking at the habitat and like Google Earth and stuff, because I've dug around in Nebraska a bit, I think there's some hilly, mountainous, hilly stuff, the heavy forest, the northwest.
In the northwest.
I would go there if I were you. Stick to the rivers.
I heard Northeast is supposed to have a few up there. I just talked to a woman today that had a sighting on one of those reservations in Nebraska. And I heard a couple good stories, but it's certainly not a hot spot. Yes, sir.
So what instrument did you major in, and how many fights did Moneymaker and Renee get in?
I'll take the easy one. Jazz guitar, 7-string jazz guitar. And for you guitar players in Texas, you guys play guitar, that's stereotyping. Right? The low string, it's an A, so you don't have to change the guitar voices. Anyway, Moneymaker and Renee. How many a day did they get into?
You can't count that high. I wasn't a math major like Cliff for a while, but I gotta say, but the funny thing is Renee would come back the next day and just go to work like nothing happened. She forgave us over and over and over.
Yeah, it's funny, Matt and Renee got along far better than Renee and I did at times. I'll tell you that. You think I'd be the easy one to get along with.
You were.
Even though they were at each other's throat quite often, there's like brother and sister. It's just like what's done is done, and let's get back to work, essentially. You know.
Yeah, they both had strong opinions, and anyways.
They're remarkably similar.
Yeah, they were.
And each one of them hated it when I said that. Which is another way they're similar.
I have a question. It's not my encounter, but a friend of mine, her and her husband was going out on a four-wheeler putting out deer corn. And they come through the woods and they saw a deer cross in front of them, and then behind it was a Bigfoot-like creature on all fours, and then went up on bipedal and kept running. Have y'all ever encountered anything like that?
Can you guys all hear that?
Yes.
She's asking about how much we hear about Sasquatches being all fours going like quadrupeds. And it happens. I mean, generally when they're small, when they're real small, they definitely do. Like the toddler size ones up to, maybe 5 foot. They're on all fours quite a bit. The adults, Yeah, maybe 5%, if that. And I think for the report, I've talked to like over 15,000 witnesses, and I've heard less than 5% say that it was a big one was on all fours.
Yeah, and part of that is they may go down a little bit, or they're certainly, they know they're 8.5 feet tall. You know, they know that's easy to see. They're down on the ground a lot, I think, because they're slinking around, being, you know, slinky. But the thing is, there's the handprint evidence doesn't support it.
Right.
You know, 95, 98% of the casts on record are footprints. Where are the handprints? That's what I got. And yeah, I have in my collection, or in Dr. Meldrum's collection together, we have by far the largest collection in the world, right? And we're transparent, so whatever, about our collections. 18 handprint casts, and about 325 or 50 footprints. About, you know.
But I have people say they've seen where they were knuckle walking, it looked like. One guy said he saw her snuck up and killed a big black bear, like a 350-pound black bear at a watering hole up in Northern California. I know this guy real well. He's a big-time hunter, tracker. And he said it crept up and it leapt over a down log. It's Northern Cal, so there's some big logs up there. And it jumped over a mountain, and they found the arm ripped out and the neck snapped and the organs removed.
Yeah, and the handprints that I'm thinking of in the collection, the knuckle print, I've got some knuckle prints over there. Apparently it was going up a slope, went down, steadied itself, and kept going. Okay, and interestingly enough, it was the center section of the phalanges. Your finger bones are called phalanges, and the center section there is the same section that the other great apes walk on. Interesting. And all the other ones. No, there's 2 Trimble County handprints Tom Shea got in 2016. It was going up a slope, and there were handprints in the slope as it went up. And all the other ones, it was digging in the ground doing stuff. So we had 2 circumstances where it's been cast with their hands in the ground. It's not saying much. So the evidence indicates not very often, but the sighting reports indicate sometimes. I can think of one time a guy saw one run across the car, or came out of the woods here, ran behind his car, and back into the woods this way, and he tracked it in the window, in the mirrors. This is on Highway 26 above Rhododendron in Oregon. He said, yeah, at one point it went down and did all fours and then kept going. And I happened to ask him, hey, how did it touch the ground? You know, just kind of an unleading question. He goes, on its knuckles. Oh, isn't that interesting? And I kind of wonder a second. He didn't notice that, of course. But, you know, I think that they're down on the ground a fair amount with their hands. But you know what? Footprints are really hard to find. It's a lot easier to see a Sasquatch than find a massive footprint, by far. Just based on the numbers, you know, sightings versus cast evidence. But the thing is, see, because their feet are big and thick and padded. They're not like deer or pig hooves, hard pokey things going into the ground. And so they're less likely to leave a print. And unless you really know what you're looking for and you're a pretty decent tracker, you're going to miss all the footprints, basically. And I think handprints would fall in that same category. And we're even less attuned to looking for them. Because even if you saw a Sasquatch, you're going to go out you're going to tune your mind frequency and say, I'm going to go see if there's any footprints. You're not looking for handprints. You know? It's about tuning your mind to see what's there. And if you're looking for footprints, you're far more likely to find a footprint than anything else.
They definitely go on all fours to approach camps. That's common, sneaking up like an army crawl, but people say they move like spiders, like their stomach will be like inches off the ground, but they'll move like an alligator, just real quick. Yeah, like the squeaky footage, thermal footage Mike Green got in Uwharrie Forest National in North Carolina is our first episode where you see it swaying and it drops down and comes up and takes the candy bar off the stump. Yeah, like that, it approaches on all fours. Then Tom Shea, if you listen to our podcast, Bigfoot and Beyond with Cliff and Bobo, we had a 2-part episode with Tom Shea, who's like the best field guide ever. He lives up in Kentucky. He's got like 40% of all the known casts ever got in the world. The guy's an excellent outdoorsman. Squatch, if you're going to say who's an expert on Squatch, it's this guy.
Yeah, he's far better than I am, that's for sure.
Yeah, and he just got a really crappy therm footage of one crawled up within 25 feet or 15 feet?
Yeah, something like that, close.
It crawled right up just 20 feet away from him, like just crawled up, belly crawling up, and just sat there for like 2 hours. And I've talked to other people that have seen him.
Charlie Raymond filmed one.
Yeah. And then And the Chris Noel's Texas footage, it's crawling. So when they're coming up on people, they will get down and crawl. And probably I would imagine they're stalking game. But as far as ambulating, that's the word.
Ambulating?
Yes.
It's like ambulance, they're different,
Yeah, as far as, going from point A to point B to the forest, they're up on 2 feet. Yes, ma'am.
So when are you gonna have your next TV series, so we can see you all in action again?
I got a couple one-offs coming out. I filmed 3 episodes in the last 6 months for other TV shows.
Same name?
Cliff Barackman, yeah. Hank Danger is my TV show. I go by the name of Hank Danger. Or my married name, McCliffa Barbara Backerman.
Channel?
I don't know, I think probably travel. There's a bunch of stuff coming on.
Animal or travel?
I think it's travel. There's so much, like, quote-unquote paranormal stuff coming out this year in travel. They're going to saturate the market.
Yeah, and I just, talking about doing some projects, I can't really say too much, but there's a pretty good one coming up, and then I got I just today agreed to do, just like right before I came here, one of the reasons I was late, was I'm going to do just one of the talking head experts for the show Strange Evidence on Science Channel. It's nothing great, I mean, it's a gig.
Stop selling yourself short.
No, I'm talking about the show. Yes, ma'am.
I was wondering, you've heard thousands of different encounters and all of the different vocalizations and sounds that the Sasquatch make. Have you noticed a pattern, like when they may whistle, it means this, or when they whoop, it may mean this? Have you kind of come up with any ideas on that?
The only thing I've noticed, maybe it's the Ohio howl, just seems to be a long distance call, and from what I've noticed over the last 15, 20 years, it seems to be, I think because we're doing them all the time, like people, since the Finding Bigfoot came out, people are doing calls all over the place that they never did before. What I've noticed, it seems like is they've shortened it and got a more of a warble at the end now.
Yeah, I've noticed a pattern with knocks, not so much vocalizations. Like some of the things, we've noticed this for years actually, long before the show, but when I were, just a bunch of jerks in the woods, camping and stuff. Like when you show up to an area, there's very often a knock, unsolicited. And when you leave an area, or when somebody leaves an area, because obviously if I leave, I'm not there to hear it. But I've stayed back in camp and like one person is driven off or whatever, and if I'm tucked away in a tent or something like that, oftentimes you'll hear a knock when that happens. So there's that, but I don't know.
It seems like 2 knocks is the most common that people hear. 2 and 3. I've heard 4, and I've heard some like rabbit. I don't even know if they're doing. We think they do a lot of them like popping their hands in front of their mouths, like doing their mouth like one of those pop.
Pounding their chest also.
Yeah, slapping their chest, or just clapping their hands out in front of them. Because I've heard them do like it sounds like they're trying to imitate a machine gun. It sounds like quick, rapid fire.
I heard one time it sounded like Buddy Rich in the woods. 16 That was insane.
Do you think that's like an invitation, or do you think it's like a sentry announcing your presence, alerting the others to your presence?
It's hard to say because I was so quiet when I heard that stuff. I don't know if it cared if I was there or not. I think sometimes it has to do with us, but I think, honestly, humans are arrogant animals. I think they have a lot less care about us than we think. I think that we're bothersome to them at best most of the time. A lot of times I don't think it has anything to do with us. But something that occurred to me a few years ago, and it's obvious, and we all know it, but it's an interesting thing to put in the forefront of your mind when you're out in the woods at night, is that when you hear them do anything, whether it's a vocalization or a knock, that means it's very likely there's another one nearby. And I never really, sure, that's obvious, right? It's totally obvious. But hold that in your mind when you're walking a trail at night alone. It's like, oh, I heard a knock over there. Because humans are weird animals, man. We talk to ourselves, but I never come home to see my dog going, rrr, 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 rrr. It sounds like it's already going, Never. Humans, I think, might be the only animals that really talk to themselves, you know? But then again, they're so human-like, maybe they do something similar, but I doubt it. I think they only make noise for other Sasquatches, really. So it's interesting, like, wonder how many there are in an area when you hear vocalizations or knocks that are unsolicited.
Yeah, I think sometimes they definitely do like the power knock as an intimidation thing. When you're somewhere, like if I was doing like aggressive call somewhere, I could just hear a crack, like this unbelievably loud, like where I'm getting like, you know, it's 50, 100 yards off, and I'm getting the direct impression that it's telling me like I'm way bigger and badder than you are.
Yeah, they don't speak English, but they are effective communicators.
Yeah,
Have you heard the
exactly.
samurai chatter, like what people call the samurai chatter or the mumbling? Like,
What about it?
have you heard like the samurai chatter, like vocalizations that sound like language?
I have not.
I've heard it a couple times. Matt and I heard it on Silver Star Mountain's first season up in Washington State. And we were hiking in a snowstorm. It was like knee-deep, slushy snow. And we were walking back down, and the camera guy and the sound guy went off to the side of the trail, away from the edge, and it was on a mountainside. You guys know what mountains are around here? Anyways.
If they're armed, be careful.
The crew was on this side, so we were supposed to walk past them, and they weren't on. And where they were close. There was a little waterfall coming down, so like the sound was trying to for them. When Matt and I had to walk near the edge of the road to get the shot right from them, getting us to hike past, we both heard that samurai type chatter. Not exactly the same, but it was similar, and I've heard it. One night, the first night I got this part, a lot of people know who he is. His name is Ranger Robert Letterman. He's Redwood State Park Ranger up in Northern California, but they used to think I was like a tweaker out there at night, like in the middle of the night, just creeping around out on some of these trails, you know, and they'd see my truck in the parking lot, and I finally convinced the guy to come out with me one night, and we had a great night. He smelled them. One got real close, came up, must have belly crawled within 25 feet of us. We couldn't see it before we had thermals. And we were hiking out of there. The next night, we were walking out in the dark, and they went crazy. It was a mom with two small ones. We tracked it the next day, and it was like 14-inch prints and then 9 and 7-inch prints. But you could hear the two little ones and the mom. They were all yelling at us at the same time doing that full samurai chatter. It was pretty nuts. And then I heard it in Australia, and some Yowies doing the same kind of, that sounded like a full language, two of them going back and forth for about 7-8 seconds. And then I think that's about the only times I've heard it. And that's in like over 30 years of being out in some of the best spots in the world. It's pretty rare to hear, but people like in Michigan and Texas report hearing it frequently. In Mississippi, people have got some recordings out of that. They say, yeah, we hear them talking all the time. So it just seems where you're at is the determining factor on that. Yes, ma'am?
I wanted to hear the story about Tom Shea and the Nutella jar.
Yeah. Tom Shea, as Bobo mentioned, is probably the best Bigfoot investigator to have ever lived. And I don't say that lightly. He's far better than I am. You can name all the greats, Patterson, Titmus, Green, and they all have their strengths. You know, Green wrote books, Patterson got lucky with the film, Titmus was one of the first on the scene, but Tom Shea is phenomenal. And he's the most humble guy you'd ever meet. He has no idea how good he is.
He's got over 10,000 pages of detailed notes from his last 30 years investigating.
Yeah, he saw a Sasquatch in 84, 86 or something like that, and it blew his mind, because he's like, what, Bigfoots are real in Kentucky, really? And he spent, ever since, just looking and trying to get closer. He's seen him a couple times. What makes him so good is not only how fortunate he is to be able to cast so many footprints. He has over 200 original casts, for example. Paul Freeman, you might know his name. He's been thought, oh, he has to be lying because he has so many, he's the luckiest Bigfooter ever. And at the end of the day, he has about 50 casts to his credit, 50. Tom Shea, who no one has ever heard of, basically, over 200. And the reason is, number one, he's an excellent tracker. Bobo and I had the privilege of tracking with him one day. We found prints that day. He's good. Number two, if he doesn't know what it is, he's pouring plaster in it to find out. those handprints, if you look at the handprints on my table, there's 2 from that set, I only have 1 with me today. He didn't know what it was, so he poured plaster in it, and sure enough, it's one of the best handprints on record, you know? And that's the secret. If you don't know what it is, cast it, bring it back, we'll figure it out later. Plaster's really cheap. But Tom, he has this area that's very close to him. Another secret is he lives in a small community in Trimble County, Kentucky. He's dialed into the local community Facebook page, and there's a couple Bigfoots that live in the area. So whenever somebody sees the monster or something, he hears about it, it gets back to him within a couple of days, he goes on site, he investigates, he tracks, and he usually brings something back. Phenomenal stuff. He has 3, and he takes meticulous notes, ever since '86 or whatever that was. He has 4 or 5 piles of spiral notebooks as high as our knees in his house. His wife was complaining to me about them because they take up so much space. And he documents every time he goes out, where he went, why he's there, the sighting or whatever it was that brought him there, the air temperature, the barometric pressure, what the soil conditions were like, how recently it rained, what the weather in general, what animals moon phases, what animals he saw, what animals he didn't see that he expected to, what plants are in bloom, what food resources he saw, you name it, everything he can think of. And that's what makes him so good. But in this particular case, they had an area that they thought Bigfoots were getting in their peanut butter, basically. And the peanut butter jars would go missing or something like that, or they'd be found with the lid unscrewed, but that sort of thing. So they figured, okay, there's some Bigfoot that's in our peanut butter. Let's see if we can get a hair sample from it. Because Tom's not about stories. Tom is about evidence. There's a big difference. And that's another reason he's one of the best ever. Because he's not interested in the stories so much as he is the evidence. Yeah, stories are important, but he goes for the evidence. And that's what makes a really good Bigfoot investigator out of a hobbyist, in my opinion. And then again, I don't want to, I'll save my scolding and chastising till tomorrow. But so this one time, he and a guy named Steve Cornell, part of his group, the Northern Kentucky Bigfoot Research Group, I think they're called, they decided, hey, well, let's take advantage of this weak spot in this Bigfoot. Let's try to get a couple of hair samples. And so what they did, Steve designed this trap, basically, a PVC tube about that big around, about that long, and they suspended it between 2 trees on wire, so no raccoons or anything like that. And they were going to, they coated the inside of it with sandpaper. And they said, okay, let's get a peanut butter jar, put it inside, and maybe the sandpaper will snag some hairs and we'll get lucky. One of those things. Well, they went to the cupboard, they didn't have any peanut butter. They did have expired Nutella, though. The chocolatey breakfast spread sort of thing, right? And so, I told you about my plans to make that fish and call it salmonella. I think Bigfoots would like it, and I think that the name recognition would go a long way to sort of selling it. But anyway, so what they did is they got a Nutella jar, and they put it inside the tube, and then they left it for 3 or 4 weeks. When they came back, they found that the tube had been disturbed. It was all crooked. And the Nutella jar was found 30 feet uphill from the trap. So it didn't fall and roll there, right? When they looked closely at the Nutella jar, or even not that closely, they aren't dumb, they noticed that it had been unscrewed and the safety seal had been removed, and inside were fingerprints, finger marks. We know it wasn't human because there was still Nutella left in the jar. And so now, Tom, he goes, well, this is interesting, this could be important. So he put the top back on, threw it in his cooler, and went home. By the time he got home, and when he pulled the Nutella out again, he noticed that the Nutella being colder, like in the cooler, had hardened. And he had the idea, oh, wait a minute. So he threw it in the freezer for a couple hours, and when he brought it out of the freezer, he poured plaster into it. He cast it. Now, I don't know how many times you, Bobo, have been told about Bigfoots coming in and trying to get the peanut butter and all this other stuff, like dozens of times by other investigators, right? But words are wind. The moment you say them, they're gone, never to come back. Stories are pretty meaningless outside of the person who's telling them, unfortunately. Tom knows this. He brought back evidence. He is the first, and to my knowledge, only person to ever take this, this rumored behavior of Sasquatches going after their peanut butter and Nutella and stuff like that, and actually showing you something to support that story. Showing you the evidence that was collected. Because stories are not evidence. They really aren't. They could convict somebody in court, but they are not evidence as such. A cast is. And that's how the telecast was all about.
And speaking of Squatcher's Luck, I'm sure you guys know what Squatcher's Luck is. It's worse than Murphy's Law. Tom actually, if you see the prints, you have the prints with you here?
I've got a couple, but I'm almost out of prints.
Yeah. It was, they named it Goliath, this massive, the big male monster one, giant one. And it actually walked up on him and he was casting its prints. It came up on him in daylight. And he was old school. He had an old flip phone. He pulled it out and hit record. And he got 5 minutes of video. Daylight, 30 feet away. He was all excited, jammed home.
He's like, I got it. It's like, as he's filming it, he's yelling, I got it.
And then he gets home and it was on selfie mode.
Yeah, and by the way, the Bigfoot replica I have in the North American Bigfoot Center, my museum, we named it Murphy after Murphy's Law.
In the back, you.
Yeah, all right. In your research, what have been the biggest misconceptions that you've discovered about Bigfoot? And how did your research evolve and your methods change as a result?
The biggest misconception we had about Bigfoot behavior.
Like getting into it and then realizing, that thing that you thought about that was different, how to switch up your plan.
Well, for me, I'll say this, that Finding Bigfoot was master's classes in Bigfoot, essentially. And going all 46 states, 5 continents, and all these different habitats, and seeing the commonalities. And so walking away from that, upper division class stuff about Bigfoot, one of the things that I took away that I think stands out against the background is that Sasquatches live in some very unexpected areas. They don't conform to our expectations at all. And so I talked to a lot of people like, that sighting has to be BS, or that handprint, that came from there. No, there's no way a Bigfoot could get there. That is now off the table with me. Totally off the table. Sasquatches live on the edge of suburbia. They live in little pockets that are almost impossible to get to unless you're a ninja, like they are, essentially. So you would think, South Dakota? No way. This is just rolling plains, and that's not what the Bigfoot books told me Bigfoot habitat is like. Throw that away. Bigfoots live in very unexpected areas because in between these huge rolling plains are these deep ravines filled with thorn bushes and thickets, and that's where they are. The Sasquatches are seen on the plains going over the plains at night to the next one. Bobo and I have both done footprint investigations literally inside the Mojave Riverbed. Like the Mojave Desert, there's a big river that flows in the middle, it's mostly dry. And it happens to be in December and January, the coldest times of year in Southern California and everywhere else except in the Southern Hemisphere. And so, what's on this side of that particular riverbed? The San Gabriel Mountains. What's on the other side? The Tehachapi Mountains that lead to the Sierras. And it's 15, 20 miles in between. Yeah, they're in there too. They're not there in August. They're there in December, and they probably cross it in one night. So for me, the biggest takeaway is don't listen to what other people tell you Bigfoots should do, because they don't know. I don't know. Bobo doesn't know, and we've been to probably more places than anybody, really. I mean, not to be all arrogant about it, but I don't know anybody else who's been to more places than us. And we don't know. How would these people know because they read John Green's book? You know what I mean? Yeah, I mean, we stand on the shoulders of giants, but the people who broke the ground that we're now tilling, they didn't have all the answers either. They're not gods. They were just the first ones there, So that's the biggest thing for me. The biggest misconception is where Sasquatches do live. Because it turns out they do live in a lot of other places that don't seem like good Bigfoot habitat.
Yeah, at least part of the time. The places they come in are outside of Seattle, the suburbs on these thin green belts. They'll go miles at night, go down, hit some dumpsters or something. Then, like these corridors are maybe smaller than this room, just a creek running for miles into town. And they'll, maybe half the size of this room, they'll green thread through yards, like through neighborhoods, and they'll go a couple miles in and come back out that same night, because they're quick. So they can go a couple miles just like that. So they'll go a couple miles in, 2 in the morning, and they're out by 4, something, 3 to 4, something like that. But yeah, it doesn't surprise me now, but it really surprised me the places they will go under the cover of dark. Yes.
What do you think will change in the next 5 years of research or tracking or what have you? Next few years, what will y'all be doing different?
Yes.
Next time y'all go out or next year's activities?
Yes, that's what we think is going to be the big change in Sasquatch research in the next 5 years. I think the real big thing is going to be the eDNA, the environmental DNA. Did you guys hear about that Loch Ness thing they just did where they found a new eel species? You can get every animal in the watershed, or anything that drains into a lake. You can get every single species, and Dr. Cliff can talk more on that one.
Yeah, eDNA stands for environmental DNA, where you can test the environment in which an animal lives or a suspected animal lives. And like, say for example, you have a pond, and you think somebody has introduced an invasive species, like that snakehead fish or something, into the pond, So what you can do is you can go test the water in that pond and test it for eDNA, and then get the DNA of every organism that lives in that pond. And if you have the qualifiers, and you know what you're talking about, you can actually narrow it down to fish or mammals or anything like that, which is what they did to the Loch Ness. And this is a big news item, and really the news item was just a hype for a TV show that came out about a month ago. But the neat thing about it is they tested the Loch Ness, and they didn't find any plesiosaurs, because it's obvious these things are not dinosaurs, because dinosaurs breathe air, and you would see them a lot more often. What they did find, though, they found an inordinate amount of eel DNA, which was very unexpected for the Loch Ness. And Bobo and I have spoken for years that these river monsters and lake monsters and stuff, they must be eels, based on our own research out in the woods and this talking to the native folk who see these things and all that jazz. So it was no surprise to me really, but I was somewhat vindicated. But anyway, that's one example of use for DNA. Now the effort is, you guys know about the nests from the Olympic Peninsula? Watch my presentation tomorrow. I touch briefly upon the nests that the Olympic Project has uncovered on the Olympic Peninsula. Several of they're suspected Sasquatch nests, and in my opinion they are. I've got nothing to lose. I will say those are Bigfoot nests. So what they've done is they've taken core samples of 7 of these nests, I believe, and Dr. Meldrum has done fundraising, like Kickstarter stuff, to get the funds to do DNA testing. Because people always say, Cliff, why don't you go DNA test that? Because it's $2,000 and I'm broke, man. I just opened a museum. I can't go do that. Right? And based on what you say of Bigfoot, no, that you're insane. And so many people, I guarantee this is Bigfoot. Really, how much money would you put on it? I bet everything I own. Cool, because DNA tests are $2,000. Oh, I don't know if I can do that,
Well, the eDNA one's like $450,000, right?
No.
The one Meldrum's going to get done, the full genome sequence.
We don't know. But the cost with no profit, because labs need the profit, right? Is between $2,000 and $4,000. Okay. Meldrum tested 4 samples. That's how much money he raised. He got like $8,000 or $10,000. He tested 4 samples, and he got incomplete DNA strands, and the segments that were produced indicate human. Now, was it because the nests are contaminated? Possibly. After all, humans did collect the nest samples. That's possible. However, it's also possible that the segments that were found are strongly human-like and identical to humans, because 98.3% of our DNA is identical to that of chimpanzees and bonobos, specifically bonobos, by which are different species that pick the chimpanzee. Now, don't freak out. It's okay, because we're identical. 60% of our DNA is identical to that of earthworms. We're related too. That's the way life works. So, and now humans broke off from chimpanzees. Our last common ancestor on the bush of life, not the tree of life, but the bush, it was about 6 to 8 million years ago. If these things are what I think they are, Paranthropus, then we broke off from them 2 to 4 million years ago, like half the distance back. So we would expect even more similarity in our DNA than that of chimpanzees, right? Well, what if we're just missing those segments? Because remember, incomplete DNA strands were recovered. What if we're just missing the differentiators? So now, to answer your question, what's really going to happen, what's really the focus now? New nests from the same area that have not been abandoned, so we can get better DNA samples out of them, fresher DNA samples, as DNA deteriorates in the wild. Try to test those with eDNA. That's the #1 technology that we can focus on. Because if we can turn the heads of a few dozen DNA scientists, I mean, I won't understand it. I don't know what DNA is. I mean, I know what it is, but I don't really get it, and I'm assuming most of you don't either. But if we can get a few dozen PhDs with the expertise to go, oh my gosh, look at this, then perhaps all the other scientists who don't know so much might go, oh yeah, look at that. And then we're getting somewhere. Maybe we can actually prove the species without killing them. I doubt it, but maybe.
What's interesting about that too is where these nests were recovered, it's at Timberland, Forestry Company owns it, and this is the first time it's ever happened. Their timber cruiser, the guy that goes through, and tells them how much timber's there, how much it's worth, was in this real rugged area. It's just 2 miles from town. And he found the nest. They contacted Derek Reynolds. Well, he let his superiors know. They said, you know what? No one had been in there for 40 years. It's a 40-year cycle cut. They hadn't done any biological surveys in that 40 years. No one had been in there. You wouldn't go there. It's so rugged. But when they found it, they said, we're going to let you Bigfoot researchers have 5 years to study this site before we log it, which is unheard of. So that's a game changer also. I think it's been, 3 years now?
3 or 4.
Yeah, so we got another year or 2 left. That's the Olympic Peninsula. Yeah, the east side of the Olympic Peninsula in Washington. It's across the Sound from Seattle. It's one I haven't called on yet. Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned Michigan, activity in Michigan. What part of Michigan do you know?
The activity in Michigan's, yeah.
And then the UP.
Yeah. Both. And you, sir?
What do you know about the guy that wrote the book, Living with Bigfoot?
I don't know that book.
He's supposed, the story goes, there's one living in his area, and it somewhat befriends he and his wife, and they leave it gifts like fruit and things, and at times it has even left gifts of flowers for his wife.
It's possible.
And his wife actually, in some fashion, we haven't read the book yet, somewhat has a communication of some sort, and so we're going to read the book.
Yeah, I mean, she asked about this book, Living with Bigfoot, or Living with Sasquatch, and it's about this husband and wife that's got a little repertoire going with a Sasquatch, they assume, and they gift each other, and I've heard that from dozens of people.
Yeah, that's not unusual behavior for
Have you
Sasquatch.
experienced it more when Renee's with you by chance?
No.
I mean, it's funny, but it's a female.
Yeah, it's generally women that they do this sort of thing with, because if you look who's out shooting everything in the woods, they look like us, not so much like, no offense to you, we're not here to hunt, but 95% of the people blowing stuff up out there look like us, so.
Pheromones and all.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, ma'am.
Can you describe the nests to me, what they look like?
I have pictures in my presentation.
Yes, sir.
You guys have did research all across the nation, the Pacific Northwest, all across. Your opinion is one species.
Yeah, the footprint, yes, from going all around the country, North America, we think it's one species, and the footprint evidence says that's what it, the physical descriptions change from area to area, and there's a lot of variety, but you gotta go with what we got. It's concrete, it's footprint evidence, and that it's the same. Yes, sir.
Do you think Bigfoot's more primate or more Homo sapien?
Both of those are primates.
Yeah.
We are primates.
If you're asking if they're closer to the great apes than Homo sapien, we'll find out hopefully here in the next year or two.
Yeah, there's some very clear things about that, though. look at Sasquatches and look at their described behaviors, and there are some glaring omissions. There are some things that they just don't do, apparently. Number one, fashion and use tools. Now, they certainly use tools. You know, I mean, crows, for God's sake, use tools. Sea otters use tools. All the apes use tools, right? And since our common ancestor used them, you know, anything that like chimpanzees and we do things, that means our common ancestor also had that ability. That's the way evolution works, right? But they don't say, but so you got, well, so they use tools to some degree, but they don't fashion tools like hominins do. Hominin is a fancy word that means everything that came off of our family tree, even if it didn't live very long or persist until, you know, recently or anything like that. Anything off the human family tree is a hominin since we broke off with chimpanzees. Okay, but so they don't fashion and use tools, and they don't use fire. Right? Those are two big glaring omissions from their behaviors. Picking up a stick and waving it around, and then like the devil's mountain. Now it doesn't count. Mount Diablo. Yeah. Yeah, in the Bay Area. That doesn't count. That's not using fire. And so what you have to do is you have to go back and look at what's our most recent ancestor that did those things. Actually, what's the first ancestor that we know that did those things? We have to look at Homo habilis is what that is. So Sasquatches have to be before that. They are clearly primates, 100% primates. Everything about their anatomy says primate. Okay. What are they? That's the question, right? So they had to break off from us before Homo habilis, because Homo habilis, handyman is what they call it, and it's a very archaic species. Before that, you have the Australopithecines. Fancy word. And you probably have heard of Lucy, the very famous fossil. She was an Australopithecine. Australopithecines have two main branches: a gracile form, a thin sort of a thinner form, which we think eventually led to us, and a more robust, stocky guy, you know. And they're called robust because they're robust. Australopithecus robustus, in fact. They're so different that sometimes they're given a different name called Paranthropus robustus, or Paranthropus boisei, and a handful of other ones. That, I believe, is what Sasquatches are. And they are not. I mean, they are human-like in many ways. They're much more human-like than chimpanzees are, but their brain size isn't that much bigger. And yeah, Sasquatches are big, so the brain sizes would be bigger, but there's a biological rule that dictates what percentage of the brain is actually used to controlling the big body as well. And so their thinking part isn't that much more than chimpanzees. It is more, but it's not that much more. So they have very human-like behaviors, but then again, so does my dog. But they would have even more so, right? And we can learn so much about ourselves by looking at them and their behaviors, just like we learn so much about ourselves by looking at chimpanzees and bonobos, about how they mourn for their dead, for example. You know, chimpanzees mourn for their dead. Well, we thought that was a human characteristic. It's not. It's just our family. Our family, you know. So it's going to be very interesting to find out more about actually what they are, because it's going to teach us so much about ourselves, the origins of language, the origins of compassion. Because Sasquatch gifting, like this woman was speaking about briefly, you'll find if you guys have interactions with Sasquatches, and probably a couple of you do, you may leave out a giant pile of apples, and when you come back, you know it's a Sasquatch if they've left one or two for you. They do that. And I think that is fascinating behavior, and it's going to shed a lot of light on our own selves. Yeah, so.
I hope I cleared that up for you. Yes, ma'am.
Y'all have traveled all over the globe, and I'm sure you've had some really amazing experiences. What was your favorite destination, your favorite place?
What was our favorite destination? Australia. Australia was rad, but that was like first world, but it was awesome. Like that's probably the best, funnest one, but the one that hit me most was Himalayas, looking for the Yeti.
Is that because you puked? No, Australia for me. Yeah, Australia was amazing. It's like San Diego with 1/4 the number of people. You know, the weather was perfect. The water temperature, the ocean water was 72 degrees, and Bigfoots were right outside of town. It was amazing.
No one knew they were there.
No one even knew they were there. Yeah, they're not. It's not a mountain culture. It's a beach culture.
Yeah, the Aboriginals knew they were there. Well, because you go off trail in Australia, you go in the bush. There's everything bites and it kills you. It's like everything's poisonous, like deadly poisonous. Like they don't go walking or like, they think those guys out in the bush are nuts, but the Aboriginals know all about them. The Aboriginals, they know them like the Pacific Northwest tribes know them. They were highly in tune with them. Yes, sir.
What other cryptids do you like to investigate besides hairy hominins?
What other cryptids do we like? What other cryptids do we like to investigate? Now we're both into like lake serpents, sea monsters, sea serpents, that kind of thing. And then I'll say this: I hate Mothman.
Dogmen scare the hell out of me.
Oh yeah, Dogman. I've been doing a lot of Dogman research.
I don't want to deal with the Dogman. They scare me pretty bad. But kind of, I'm into a lot of. I mean, Sasquatch is my gig, right? I really enjoy that. I understand it. There's a biological niche for it. I get it. You know, that one makes a lot of sense to me. But that doesn't mean I don't love the other weird stuff too. I'm 110% into it. Well, I'm 98% into it. I'm 110% into Bigfoot, right? I love all cryptid stuff, but I only have so much time and opportunity, unfortunately. Yeah, I've seen UFOs. I know it's not a cryptid. I've had 2 horrible ghost experiences. I don't dig that at all. But the world is a weird. The universe is a weird, wacky place with all sorts of interesting possibilities. I just don't think Sasquatches are one of those weird things. I think they make perfect biological sense, and therefore they're perfectly biological. But I love all the other stuff too. When we get, it creeps me out a bit when it gets on the edge of paranormal. You know, because I mean, paranormal things, yeah, they exist. Sure they do. You know, we're at such an infantile place in our development as a species at this point. We really are. Remember, 120 years ago, we didn't know about germs. 120 years ago, your grandparents' parents didn't know about washing their hands. You know, like before surgery. You know, and things like that. I'm not kidding you, right? 1880s, 1890s, they figured out what germs are, and then they later figured out, oh, that's what causes infection, right? We're at a very basic, savage place in our development as a species. Who knows what paranormal really will turn out to be at the end? But I love all that stuff. All that stuff. When a new species of frog is discovered, like in Peru, I'm into it. You know, I read the article. I'm all about it. New species of jellyfish, I love that. You know, because it's fascinating. The world is a beautiful, beautiful place full of mystery and wonder, even still. You know.
They still don't know about germs in Nepal.
No, they don't. Or Sumatra for that.
Yeah, or Sumatra, or up the Amazon. I went to a Buddhist monk healer when we were in Nepal, and he spit all over my infection on my leg. And then banged, made loud sounds to scare out the evil spirit out of my leg.
Did it work?
It didn't kill me.
No, it didn't. Like I said, it didn't work.
A little man there.
How long do you think Bigfoot has been in North America?
How long has Bigfoot been in North America? I think longer than the humans, is my guess. The natives report when they came in that they were already here. They might have came over like a long time ago. Cliff, I'm sure, has them.
Well, the most recent land bridge opening was like 15,000 years ago. But there were many of those over the last 100, 200,000 years. It could have been any one of those that they popped over and stayed. It's a nice place.
Yes, sir.
You know, you talked about they put those rocks, big logs, stuff like that. How strong are they?
Yes, how strong they are, judged by how big. I can say that I didn't see it, but I heard a rock. I was at Bluff Creek. I was camped at Louse Camp, and I was with this guy, Manny. He actually passed away about 5 or 6 years ago. He was trying to spend a whole year in the Cascade Mountains in Oregon and broke his leg in the winter and ended up passing away. But I was with him, and we heard this. Has anyone here ever been to Louse Camp? Shelley Mon? Yeah, right there. Oh yeah, I was there with him. We heard this. There's a cliff right across from the camp, and Bluff Creek's it's like a small river, and there's not vertical, but a very steep hill. It's 120 feet. Well, it's got trees and big bushes like rhododendrons and stuff on it. And we heard also in the middle of the night this just branches and trees smashing, and we just heard this splash, and it hit the creek at about 3 or 4 feet, probably about 4 feet of water, and it was like a meteorite hitting. You just hear all the water displaced, and you hear it hit like dry gravel, it sounded like, and this biggest swoosh, and water flew up into the camp. And we're like, it's pretty far, like where you camp right there, it's a good distance. It's probably from here to the door, or not that far, probably from here to Shelley's banner. And there was water flew up in there. I mean, and the next day, because we swim there all the time when it was hot, because it gets like 100, above 100 up there in the day. And there was a boulder, like, it was about this big. It had to weigh over 1,000 pounds. And one other story I got from these loggers back in the 60s, the original Bigfoot tracks, it probably very well could have been the 1958 Jerry Crew Bigfoot track, you know, the famous one that was on the cover that made the word Bigfoot go around the world. These guys had a logging show going down in a place called Hyampom. If you read the old John Green books and stuff, they mentioned Hyampom a few times in there. And they came up on after Thanksgiving break, they came back and it had been snowing. As they drove up, they saw 3 huge tracks. It must have been 3 adult males. It's the only time I've ever heard of 3 adult males being together. And they said that they threw 55-gallon drums of oil off the side, big, you know, the big tires, checked those off, broke into they had a shed built up there for keep their equipment, all their saws and that kind of stuff. And they broke into that and just destroyed it. And they walked around. And there was a big D8 caterpillar. You guys know what a D8 caterpillar is? Like a 80,000-pound bulldozer. They ripped off like all the hoses and stuff, and they went over to a D5, which is like 50,000 pounds, and all 3 tracks converged on one side of it and flipped it over on its side. So they didn't lift 50,000 pounds. I don't know what the Cliff could probably figure it out, but the fulcrum point of that outside track, they were able to tip over a 50,000-pound piece of machinery. And all their feet, the track sunk real deep into the hard. It was like kind of frozen mud. Their feet broke right through and made deep impressions in there. So they're strong. I know they did a study on great ape strength, just as a comparison, and there's like a 425-pound male gorilla. And they had it on those universal weight machines. They had chimps, gorillas, and orangutans. And the male gorilla was like 425 pounds. The machine went up to 1,600 or 2,000, I can't remember, but they'd give it grapes every time they did a rep. They'd give it a grape. And it was getting all excited. And it threw the bars out and rolled up and caught it with its back foot and started benching them. And then doing it one-handed, throwing it back and forth, foot to hand, and benching. It started getting so excited, the cable came off those wheel things, blocks, whatever, because it was going so fast. I mean, so we know that Sasquatches get at least twice that big, 3 times that size. So their strength's off the scale. Brian.
This question probably for Cliff. Is there such a thing, because I like books, read them, as a scientific journal by a statistician, a professor of statistics, that potentially proves the probability of this without even being a witness? You know what I'm saying? Does that make sense?
Nope. Although there is a guy who, I can't remember his name, but I have this study. He emailed me, I could get that one, who was doing a statistical analysis on, was it GIS? I forget what that stands for, but it's like basically spatial time sort of stuff, like when and where these things happen, like sighting encounters happen. And he used Bigfoot data in his study on a lark, kind of as a joke in a way to prove a point, that using that patterns can be found in seemingly random data. Okay, and he used it because we all know Bigfoot isn't real, so I'm going to use Bigfoot sighting reports from the BFRO and show you how patterns can develop. And he proved some other point with it. It was a geospatial sort of thing. But he was actually a Bigfoot who did that. And Dr. Meldrum knows his name. He's really the Nathan Crafty, terrible. But I can get you the study. And it turns out that the patterns he developed were totally biological, sort of mammalian patterns, you know. And he used it for another purpose, but yeah, he kind of snuck that in there as a fun.
Figured skeptics might be persuaded to different way, possibly like that.
Dr. Henner Fehrenbach did statistical analysis of a number of things as well, based on sighting reports, a lot of John Green data, footprint casts, and things like that. His data is skewed, in my opinion, based on what terrible observers people are for height and distance and weight and all that sort of stuff. And even the footprint data is skewed as well, because I want to say he maybe used Grover's collection, and Grover Cranston's collection. He had 60 or 70 casts. But what he didn't realize is how many of those footprint casts represent the same individual. That wasn't really known when Grover was alive. That's a recent thing, like Jeff and I have been working on the last 5 or 6 years. So like Paul Freeman evidence, 50 casts or something, probably represent 4 or 5 individuals. And Grover would have it for like 15 or something like that. And so his data is skewed because he didn't, Henner's still alive, he lives out in Arizona now. He didn't really understand the flexibility and malleability of the Sasquatch foot. So his data is skewed by having, 12 casts from Patterson given chromosome, or maybe even 13 actually. So it's heavily skewed that way. So, but anyway, yeah. So Henner did that stuff, and that stuff is available on Matt's website, the VFRO site. If you look under what is a Bigfoot, there's about a 4 or 5 page article written by Henner and Fehrenbach. It goes through all sorts of stuff. You can look for, and there's another paper that's published in a more appropriate format that has all the statistical analysis.
The red hat.
What year? This is for Cliff. What year were you back in the Mojave River?
2005.
Yeah, it was after I met you. It was like 5 or 6, 2005 or 2006.
Yeah, I used to live in Manchester.
Oh yeah. Well, that's a famous story about the Bigfoot that was out in Lancaster in the 70s. It's in John Green's books, and when talking to people that were out there, there had been a huge explosion of rabbits.
Oh, yeah, that was in Antelope Valley.
Yeah, that's right next to Lancaster.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so whenever something like that pops up, when you dig a little bit, you can find why they were there.
Yeah.
It's known for plenty of jackrabbits, and there is animals there.
Yeah.
This particular year, Huckleberry. Not Huckleberry.
Rick Hucklebridge.
Hucklebridge. Yeah, Rich Hucklebridge is an old search and rescue guy out there. He did some digging in there because he lives down there.
He was a deputy sheriff.
Oh, there you go. Now he's that's where he was.
Yeah.
He's a little old now. But he said that year, the grass was like a lot of rain, and the grass grew like 6 feet high, and it was crazy. And because of that, the rabbit population exploded. And there's rabbits were everywhere. There was a plague of lagomorphs.
And there was cover all over.
Cover, right. And then the Bigfoots moved in and cleaned it out. Yeah, they're really, really good at balancing things out, equilibrium, And wherever, and this gentleman right here, I was talking to him earlier, it's like, what do I look for? And I go, well, you look for where there's an imbalance. You look for where there's too much food of one kind. I talked to another biologist, a botanist in the Sierras. He was going up to do a survey of some rare meadow thing or whatever, plants in a meadow. And I asked him, hey, by any chance, did you see anything that was unusual? Was there too much of something or whatever? He goes, yeah, now that you mention it, you could walk across the brook trout in the stream. He'd never seen so many in his 20 years of surveying in the Sierras. And in this case, the rabbits, Antelope Valley, that happened there. There's also the Sandman, the Borrego Springs, right at the base of the hills there. And what's at the top of Borrego Springs on that little highway? There's that Yeti statue right up top. That's one of the TV shows I did, by the way. I'm not supposed to tell anybody, so shh. So yeah, I did one of those things on it. But I forget what the question was now, but nonetheless, that's what happened.
You answered it.
Oh, and check this out. As a side note, Hucklebridge was cruising garage sales, and he came across original plaster casts from that event at a garage sale and bought them all up.
Lucky. Is there someone that hasn't asked a question yet? Yes, ma'am.
Do you hear of a lot of sightings in the Smoky Mountains? And when you were there, did you go out to woods meeting?
I didn't go in the Smokies. I went southwest of Nashville for a few nights, and we actually heard callback. And it's probably going to be in a documentary. I was out there with, when we were filming in Nashville before, we filmed at Johnny Cash's old cabin, and his son inherited his old farm hunting property down in the southwest. We went down there, and there's reports of the wild thing, they call it down there. And we went down there, and got a call back. So I think every time I've been to Tennessee, we've heard vocalizations. I mean, for my money, like the best spots are probably like East Texas, West Louisiana, northern part, and then that whole like Ohio, West Virginia, Tennessee, Kentucky, Western North Carolina, Western Virginia. I think that's the other. I think that's even better than the Pacific Northwest because the food sources are so much more condensed. There's so much more food. Like where we're at in the Pacific Northwest, there's about one black bear for adult male black bear for like every 75 square miles, and then down there in Smokies, it's one for every 16 square miles. So it's,
now in East Tennessee and in the Smokies, I mean, every day you see a bear sighting.
yeah, so that just shows it's 4 times the density of food, so you're going to get, and bears and Sasquatch have a pretty high correlation of density. Yes, sir, in the far back.
Do you think the Minnesota Iceman is a real Sasquatch body is down in Austin now? And do you think the government hides this whole subject?
That's a long question. He asked if we think if the Minnesota Iceman was a real Bigfoot, and is the government hiding it?
Well, the government, that's a different question.
The one in Austin is latex.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is the copy that the potential real one was replaced with.
You think it's a copy?
Oh, I know it's a copy.
Yeah, what I've heard from guys that have researched it is they said that Jimmy Stewart, the actor, bought the original and had it incinerated.
Yeah, but that might have been a crossing of stories too, because the Himalayan thing. But you know, Bernard Wellman's, Sanderson, they saw this thing like up close, and it smelled. It smelled of decay. I know other people who saw it early on in its career. Will from Nashville. He said it smelled. You could smell the decay.
Doug Hijack from Monster Quest.
Did he see it too?
Oh yeah, I saw it a couple times. Yeah, Doug Hijack made Monster Quest and then Survivor Man Bigfoot. He saw it as a teenager.
And then later when they went back, and it had been replaced with the latex dummy that is now in the museum in Texas, it's in a slightly different position. The body is in a different position than the original photographs that Sanderson and those guys took. You know, I would talk to Ken about it. Ken has done, you moved. Yeah, he's a mobile guy. I would talk to him about it. He's done a tremendous amount of research on this subject and has a lot to say about it. Yeah, so I would check out his situation.
As far as government cover-up, I think it's not like a top-down like conspiracy. I think it's more just if you start talking about this stuff, it hurts your career, so people don't talk about it. And we know that the guy that was Undersecretary of the Department for the Interior under George W. Bush the last 2 years, Lyle Laverty, he actually is the guy that took those really great black and white photos of the Patterson-Gimlin Trackway, those black and white photos that show the prints perfect. He was like 22 years old, something just coming out of college, but he worked his way up. He was in charge of 6 Rivers National Forest, which is 1.1 million acres, where Bluff Creek is and a bunch of that early stuff. And he's a guy Cliff and I knew, older guy who was a Bigfooter back since the late 50s. He passed away about 10 years ago, but he knew the guy well. And he said he had 2 sightings when he was a crew leader fighting fires in 6 Rivers in the 70s. So we know that the guy that was running the Department of Interior, which oversees like 52% of all the land in the United States, he knew about him, but he won't talk about it. And all honest, yeah, Mitch McConnell's had 2 sightings. We've heard it from a guy that
2 sources.
Yeah, 2 sources. One guy was a retired Kentucky congressman, and Rand Paul seen one, and they said that Mitch won't talk about it. He saw him, and he just doesn't really care. He was doing fundraising events, like traveling around the state, going up to those horse farms.
It shows what screwed up priorities that guy has.
Worried about the country and budget and all this.
I don't think that's what he's worried about.
Could be doing Bigfoot stuff. But yeah, I mean, it seems like the government's a little more interested in it. I mean,
Tim Burchett, the guy who represents Knoxville, Tennessee, the 2nd District in Tennessee, he's in the House of Representatives now. He came out to visit me when I did the Gatlinburg gig, like when I did the Smoky Mountain Bigfoot Conference. I gave him a call, hey man, I'm going to be up. And he drove an hour and a half out of his way just to come say hi.
He said he's gonna hold committee hearings when he gets some seniority on it. For real, he is. He's pretty.
He's a display in my museum. I have his his whatever official picture, and then I have his re-election stickers, his birch it with a Bigfoot behind it. Yeah, he's great. He's never seen one, but he loves the subject. He's wide open to it. We told him, man, if you hear about something, you gotta tell us about it. And he goes, all right, no problem. No. He's cool.
Yeah.
I don't agree with his politics necessarily, but I love the guy.
Oh, he's cool.
Yeah, he's rad.
Behind you, sir, that lady. Yeah, she.
Is there any place that you've always wanted to investigate that you haven't had the chance to?
Is there any place we wanted to investigate but haven't had the chance? Not 10,000.
Yeah, lots and lots and lots. North Cascade National Park in Washington, like the very upper part of the Cascades. I've always wanted to go there. I want to go to the Cascades in British Columbia. I've done a little bit up there, but I want to go like deep. British Columbia is, I think, bigger than California, Washington, and Oregon combined.
Yeah, with like only 1 million people and 900,000 of them are down within 50 miles of Vancouver. So it's like if you look at a map of the West Coast, California, Oregon, Washington, you have 900,000 down in San Diego, then 100,000 from LA to the Canadian border. That's how big BC is, and the whole place is killer habitat.
I want to do this. I want to do the mountains of South America too. Yeah, because Chile and places like that, they have a lot of stories of these very wild men, and no one's writing them down. No one talks about them except the local indigenous people. So no one knows about them. I know a couple of anthropologists that went digging through books and the literature and found hundreds of references to similar sort of things, and we haven't even scratched the surface. Haven't even scratched the surface down there.
Yeah, like the Laplanders, those nomadic deer herders up in northern Finland, going into Russia, that just cross the border at will. Those guys, they have stories of Bigfoots raiding their reindeer herds. I'd love to. There's endless places to go check out.
Endless.
Yes, sir, in front of me.
What's your theories on why there hasn't been any bones found? Do you think that is? Do you think they buried the bones, or?
Well, I think they bury them, but also Cliff has a whole. I think you talk about it tomorrow, don't you?
No, I don't. But I can. Yeah, basically the short version, nature recycles it. They hide their bodies because just like your farm dog, you find hey, Fido's missing. You find them 3 months, you find the bones 3 months later in the house, that kind of stuff. They hide themselves when they're sick. They die one day. The meat's eaten almost right away. The bones are eaten by the most plentiful animal in North America.
But even if you saw the bones, if it wasn't a skull, if you just saw a big femur, you think it's a moose or a cow or a horse. I mean, we're not. That's if you knew, because the bones get scattered, you're just going to see like some femur or tibia or something. You wouldn't know that's a Bigfoot.
The skull possibly you probably recognize it, but also and then the moths eat the hair. And the bones are eaten basically. And check this out, okay? The rarity of the species is something that very few people take into consideration. Okay, Oregon, where I live, has the second highest number of forested acres out of all 50 states, second only to Alaska. Okay. Oh, by the way, guess what number 3 is?
Georgia.
Georgia, you're absolutely correct. Yeah, Georgia has a third, higher than Washington, higher than California. So anyway, Oregon basically has more Bigfoot habitat than any other state except for Alaska. Okay. And using Dr. Krantz's calculations of 100 bears per 1 Bigfoot, and Dr. Meldrum's calculations of land use by Sasquatch family groups, turns out he zeroes in on about the same number, so I think it's probably more or less moderately kind of sort of correct. 100 to 1. There's about 30,000, 35,000 bears in Oregon. 100 to 1 means there's about 300 Bigfoots in Oregon, Castle Exposure. And so it's about 300 Bigfoots in Oregon, let's say. If they live as long as the other great apes and humans, and possibly a little bit longer because there's a biological rule, I forget the name, that states within a species, animals that are bigger live longer. That's why like giant tortoises live longer than smaller ones, and big ass whales live longer than dolphins, stuff like that. So they might live 50 or 60 years. Real rough math numbers, at 300 Sasquatches in Oregon, at that lifespan, 5 deaths a decade in the state, where there's more habitat than anywhere else except Alaska. People don't consider that when they're saying, we should have found a bone. And we don't find bear bones. We don't. I just got done reading a book called Shadows in the Forest. written by a couple biologists that headed several teams of bear biologists in Idaho, studying 3 populations of bears in Idaho, 300, 400, 500 bears in the populations. It was a 13-year study. They found 1 naturally dead bear in their study. And it was in the dead, because these guys were gnarly. They would go into the bear dens, tranquilize them, drag them out, get the blood samples, tag their ears, shove them back in the middle of winter. These guys were badasses, right? And in that amount of time, they found 1 naturally dead bear. And it was in the dead of winter, shoved in its den. They don't know what happened to any of the other bears that may have died on their watch.
Yes.
Have you ever heard about the living trees, or are they always falling around?
Yeah, they definitely go in trees, especially the small ones. This native family I know up in Washington State, and you get up in those Northwest tribes, no one knows them like they do. They have just generations of thousands of years of knowledge. And what I was told is the young ones, during the spring, they're up in the trees at night just getting eggs. And people report too in trees, they're like chimpanzees. But we get some reports of adults, big adults up in bigger trees. And we've heard this a lot at night when we're out squatching all over the country. It's just be whoomp, like something heavy landed in the woods at night. Like it sounds like someone just dropped, or like when I don't know if you guys know about this around here, but like when a big snow, the roof's covered with snow, and it just all slides off at once and lands a couple stories down, and goes thump, makes that big loud thump sound. We hear that all the time in the woods, and it's they're picking up stumps and rocks and dropping them, or they're jumping out of trees. Okay, 2 more questions. Anyone didn't ask one yet? Yes, sir, in the orange.
How violent can they get?
How violent can they get?
We never hear from the people who did this.
They're a lot of bark and not a whole lot of bite. I mean, no.
But you did say they killed bears, so I mean, I guess they can.
Oh, they could be. I'm sure a few people get picked off. I mean, they get shot at all the time. I wouldn't imagine they'd get a little mad and grab someone once in a while. But if they didn't kill me, and I totally asked for it and deserved it, and put myself in positions where it could have. I mean, they could have snuffed me in a second, and here I am. So, but I wouldn't recommend doing what I did. That's probably pretty stupid, like antagonizing, throwing rocks at them and stuff like that.
I don't practice what I preach because I'm not the kind of person I'm preaching to.
Last question. Anyone didn't ask a question yet?
Anyone else?
All right, someone did ask a question.
Eastern Oklahoma, have you been there?
Yes.
Yes.
Southeast?
Yes.
Okay. Last question in the brown in the back. Oh, you, man.
I just want to tell you we're grateful for all the time y'all spend and all the information y'all shared with us through all the shows and today.
And you exemplify why we love Texas.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thanks for coming out, you guys.
If you liked this video, be sure to check out our other content and get connected on our page and social media sites. Every day, new discoveries are being made all across the world and beyond, so let's work together to find out what's next. And remember, we won't know if we don't go. I'll see you in the Vortex.